My journey as a Superman fan started with a tattered red cape blowing in the wind. That ending rocketed me forward like a red-blue blur through a decade-long origin story and poignant tales of self-discovery and now fatherhood, and backward to the character's very beginnings. Now, on this podcast, we journey together across time and media to examine the stories that have defined the Man of Steel. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Superman number 1 through 28 by Brian Michael Bendis and Ivan Reis is the owner of Acme Comics in Greensboro, North Carolina, Lord Retail himself, Jermaine Exum.
You said the owner. I'm looking over my shoulder like, hey, where's the owner? It's me. It's me. It's taken a little bit of getting used to. When people ask over the decades, like, did you own the store? And I'm able to give a different answer now. And it takes me a second, even now. It takes me a second to know that I can give a different answer.
Yes, and for anyone who has watched the My Comic Shop Country documentary film, you are featured prominently in that. And you have also been a guest multiple times on my other podcast, My Comic Shop History. So anyone who has followed the rest of the Flat Squirrel Productions library, you're very likely very familiar with Lord Retail, but this is your first time on this show, and I'm excited to talk some Superman with you. And not just any Superman, but the Bendis run on Superman. People have some feelings about this run, as I'm sure you know.
I feel like I want to give a couple of, yes, I was chosen for this particular one for reasons, but I do have, I think, some Superman credentials. I was primarily a Marvel Comics reader, but I got into DC Comics around the death of Superman, like you were supposed to. I was the right age to want to know what that was, regardless of how you feel about it as far as like a gimmick. It was a good gateway to get into Superman. And not long after that, I think that Superman, the animated series, was a thing. Following up Batman, the animated series, which was my real deep dive into becoming a Batman fan. Superman, the animated series, was the gateway through which I fully stepped through to Superman content. And I think you can relate to it as well, perhaps.
Absolutely. The Superman, the animated series, we did a 5-episode event on it at the beginning of 2022. And as much as it certainly was a big part of my childhood and my Superman fandom at that time, I had not fully appreciated just how effective and well done and timeless that cartoon was until I came back to it now and rewatched it. So I always had affection for it, but even more so now. So it's cool to hear that played such a large role for you. And of course, that Death of Superman was that similar gateway, just as it was for me. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, like from the Parasite to the Toyman to the New Gods, it presented these concepts so well that I at least had a handle on them, and then I could go explore like the source material. And I think that without that cartoon, maybe I never really got into Superman past a certain point. But through that, I was there for it. I picked up some Silver Age material. I'm a big Legion of Superheroes fan, which that's kind of that's a side deal to Superman content. But I followed the Triangle series of Superman, which was Superman is basically a weekly comic book. You had Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, Man of Steel, each one with its own creative team, et cetera, but it was basically a weekly story. And the way you were able to follow it, if you weren't reading it weekly, is they had the Triangle numbers, which was that was a cool thing, and we'll probably never see the like again, even if we don't need to see that function again. It was a cool thing.
Well, you have sufficiently proven your Superman credentials. Not that anyone called them into question, but I appreciate you laying it out and telling us a bit about your Superman fan journey. A couple of reasons why I wanted to have you on for this episode in particular. One is that I was actually at your shop the night that Action Comics 1000 released, and that featured Bendis's first Superman story. It was 5 pages drawn by Jim Lee, and it introduced Rogol Zaar. And of course was part of this Action 1000 milestone anniversary celebratory issue. But I was at your shop in April 2018. I was filming, it was the first round of filming for My Comic Shop Country. And so I was at your shop and interviewed you and other folks in and around the Acme community. And I filmed that midnight release. So I filmed you guys setting up for the release of Action 1000. I filmed your customers lining up outside. And of course, one of the highlights of that was in the midst of this midnight release, your pal, Brian Michael Bendis, the writer whose work we're discussing on this episode, made a surprise voice cameo. Not a surprise to you. I know you had been working to set that up, but he called into the shop and you basically conducted a little interview with him in front of all of your customers about what he had planned for Superman. It was a very cool moment, and I felt the excitement of the Acme community in that moment.
Yeah, it was a cool thing. Every now and then there's things I can do, such as reach out into the world and maybe, because comics is such a tight-knit community, sometimes a store, can build a relationship with a creator of the product that they sell. Sometimes it's possible. And in this case, I'd connected with Bendis a good long while ago. I was looking through super old emails from years ago where we'd email back and forth about different stuff. I mean, years ago. Coincidentally, on March 21st of 2005 is when I first set up a account at Bendis's Jinx World message board, and I pulled out of the ether the name Lord Retail that a customer had started calling me that. So 17 years ago, to start using Brian Michael Bendis's message boards, where Lord Retail kind of became whatever you feel it is today. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Anytime a creator takes time out of their day, their schedule, to interact in some way, that's always appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a very cool moment. So I know you do have this relationship to some extent with Bendis. Do you think he'll ever listen to this?
I don't know. I will certainly send it to him. I need to send him an email just about turns of events around here. Like, I still haven't let him know that I own the store. Haven't done that yet. Even my parents are like, "Did you talk to the Bendis guy? Did you tell him what's going on?" I'm like, "No, been busy. Haven't done it yet."
Well, before you send this to him, let's see how it goes, because my view on it, I'll share as we get more into it. But well, you know what? Let me just get this out of the way. Let me give my headline, my take on this run. Now,
threat or menace.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to bury the lead, and not that my audience is waiting on bated breath to know what I thought about this, but the Bendis run has come up from time to time, and not too long ago on the podcast we covered the initial Rebirth era, the Superman run by Tomasi and Gleason, and the Action run by Dan Jurgens, and I liked those runs in concept more so than I did in execution. We talked all about that in those episodes, but I understood why people had a lot of affection for it. But, I knew this Bendis run was out there waiting for me. And my only experience with it prior to this reading project was I read Action 1000 when it came out, and I did read the weekly 6-issue Man of Steel miniseries that Bendis did that kicked off his era. I did read that as it was coming out, but for all the rest, I only read about it and heard about it. So I knew the broad strokes, the major beats of the Bendis run from reading about it, but I hadn't read it myself. And to be perfectly honest, not just what I've heard online, but what I've heard from people in my circle, people I know, I did not go in with the impression that this was a beloved run. And I don't know if you feel differently. And one of the things I did want to ask, and I'll ask you in a second, is what sort of feeling you got from your customers towards this run? Because again, online is one thing, but actually on the ground, in person, on the store is something else. So I'm curious about that. But I went into this with that in mind, that this was a bit polarizing to some extent or another, but I did go in with an open mind. And my takeaway after rereading Man of Steel and reading the 28 issues of the Superman title, I purposely did not do Action, but I know you have read that and we'll touch on it, was I genuinely felt that Bendis had a good handle on the characterization of Clark and Superman. I liked the way he depicted the character. I enjoyed the narration that took us into Clark's head, and I felt that it tapped into the core ideals of the character while also making him feel like a modern and relatable person. And that goes a long way for me. So I really, really enjoyed the characterization. the stories left me a bit colder. In almost every instance, I had some issue with either the concept and or execution of it. And, we'll get into that more. So in the end, I can't say I came away from this in love with this reading assignment. There was a lot of good stuff there, but I do see where a lot of the sentiment that I've heard, I see where that comes from. So that's kind of where I am at this point.
So Superman is many different things to many different people. There are points, because I have listened to episodes of your Superman podcast, and there are points of divergence. There are points where I totally get where you're coming from. Even if I don't agree with where you're coming from, I understand where you're coming from. Smallville is something that I believe to you is part of Superman. It's not like a separate thing. When you think of Superman, you're thinking of the way that show made you feel, or what you thought about what was going on there, like the introspection that came from that TV show. That's part of your Superman, bundle.
My fan journey. That's very much baked into the DNA of my Superman fandom. 100%.
Yes. Whereas I think for me, it's Superman, the animated series, serves its own place, and probably the place that Smallville has for you, I think. But to have been around since 1939, Superman is, and rightfully so, many different things to different people. As far as he is this, never that. He will always do this, but not that. It's just one of those things. But for me, when I'm carrying animated series, Death of Superman, to maybe, I'm trying to think where I stopped really being into Superman. I think Infinite Crisis is where I kind of, once that story ran its course, I think that's when I was done, barring certain instances. Jeff Johns and Gary Frank, I was there for that, obviously. And Bendis, I was there for that. But for the most part, that's kind of my window and my understanding of how Superman works, like what he does. I do feel, I do agree with you that a lot of work went into making Clark Kent and Superman a relatable person in a way that I think only All-Star Superman touched upon, in that Superman can be someone other than catching people and hitting people, that he can do so much more than that. And he wants to do so much more than that. So I think that was there. That was a intentional, this is something to showcase about this character. As far as some of the storylines and beats, I think there's a lot of 70s content as far as what was going on. There was a lot of 70s vibe. And I don't know 70s Superman that well. I think I know Silver Age Superman more than 1970s, early 80s Superman. I couldn't tell you really what was going on there, but it was some weird stuff. It was. But yeah, this is I wasn't sure how you were going to feel about it. I did feel like maybe you were hearing a lot of reaction before you actually got to the stuff, because that's just in nature of being online these days. People form opinions about stuff before they get to the stuff. So I didn't know which way you'd go.
I'll say this. In terms of how other people's feelings may or may not impact my enjoyment level of something, what I've found is that when people are gushing about something, it does create the risk that I am going to be let down because I've heard such great stuff. So in that sense, I feel like with the Tomasi and the Jurgens runs, sad to say, people were pretty high on them from what I heard, and I went into it and I was like, well, okay, I'm not where you guys are. But when people are more down on something, that actually does not make me go in wanting to dislike it or even expecting to dislike it. But I think it does, it sets my expectations at a certain level, but at a level that I think makes me more primed to be open to enjoying it. And look, plenty of stuff I've talked about on the show, and the Snyder films are a great example where, I'm not afraid, I'm not shy about, voicing an opinion that's counter to maybe what a lot of others feel. So, just because people don't like something, it's not like I go in and I'm like, oh, I'm going to hate this too. It's quite the opposite, if anything. I feel like I go in open to it, and maybe this is the lawyer in me or the Rocky fan who likes the underdog. I feel like a lot of times, like I'll go into something like that wanting to find something to root for, because it's like, it's gotten beaten up on enough. It's like, let's find something to celebrate. So, I did go in, and I feel confident in saying this. I went in there pretty open-minded.
Yeah, and I have opinions on the Zack Snyder presentation of Superman. I have opinions on Kenny Braverman. That's Conduit, if you will.
Yeah, buddy.
Cyborg Superman, I've kind of reconciled with that, but Conduit, I will never, ever go to bat for that character.
I obviously I've been very high on Conduit from my memory, and later this year, one of our last big events of 2022, we are going to be looking at the period of time from the post-death and return through the wedding, and that will cover the Kenny Braverman Conduit storyline. So I am excited, but also a little nervous, I won't lie, to revisit those storylines that I remember very fondly and that have left me with this impression that Kenny Braverman is this brilliant, underutilized, overlooked villain, and I might feel differently upon reread. I don't know. That's the beauty, the risk and reward of this podcast. Sometimes, you go in expecting it to be one thing and it's better than you thought. And it doesn't always happen, but so it goes. So
it's hard to invent new characters for Superman. It really is. And that's something that was part of the Bendis run, in inventing some new stuff.
It was there was a lot of newness there. And when we talk about the run, like I said, we're focusing on the main Superman title, which again, Bendis was on for 28 issues, primarily drawn by Ivan Reis with some other artists as well. But when we talk about sort of the major tentpole events, storylines, ideas of that run, what we're talking about specifically are the introduction of Rogol Zaar and this notion that Krypton didn't die by natural disaster, but rather was destroyed by Rogol Zaar, which ties into Jor-El's role on this intergalactic council. We also have the very controversial to this day aging up of Jon Kent from 11 years old to 17 years old, and his joining the Legion of Superheroes and forming the United Planets. And hand in hand with that, back on a more earthbound setting, we have Superman revealing his identity to the world. So, I mean, those are some of the big... What have I missed? I feel like I'm leaving out something big.
I think those are the three, big brand... Well, maybe not Jon Kent being a brand-changing thing, but, Krypton, which recently I noticed and was reminded that the origin of Superman and how he works is told on page 1 of Action Comics #1. One panel, destruction of Krypton, another panel, rocket ship, another panel, kindly couple, yellow sun, powers. That's one page, covers all that stuff.
That All-Star Superman, is that what you were referring to, All-Star or Action?
No,
original?
This is Action Comics #1, original 1939. Everything's covered on the first page.
Action #1 doesn't even have the Kents. He's just brought to an orphanage by the passing motorist.
Yes.
So
we're refining the storyline, but yes, the basics are on one page, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this was one of the major problems I had with this run was the Rogol Zaar of it all. And I ran into sort of two big hurdles. One was, and I've talked about this on the show before, we've actually talked about it not too long ago, in fact, very recently. I don't like any notion that Krypton was destroyed by a single person or entity. I much prefer this natural disaster that they could have been saved from had they heeded the warnings of Jor-El. So the idea that someone's behind it is, to me, a little bit counter to the core of the story. But as with everything, I'm open to it if there's a good reason for it and a good story and a good explanation. And maybe I missed something, or there was more tie-in material in Supergirl that laid everything out and I didn't read it. I don't know, but honestly, even after going through all of this, I can't tell you for sure if, or more importantly, why Rogol Zaar destroyed Krypton, how he came to be, besides one throwaway line that said Jor-El created him, or what exactly Jor-El's the source of Jor-El's tension with the council was. I cannot answer those questions, and that to me is a big problem.
Oh, we're going to unpack that stuff, but I think the biggest elephant in the room for someone that may want to explore, the block that we're covering is actually something you covered on a previous Superman podcast. The big elephant in the room is, why is Jor-El here? Why is actual proper Jor-El of Krypton just around? And I think that this it carries it over from a previous storyline. It doesn't really fully lay that out. Jor-El's just there, and he had been there for a while. But that's the big elephant in the room. So I don't know how you feel about it. Well, I do know how you feel about that. But I think that the context for there's a context for Jor-El still being around, and it's the same context for Flashpoint Thomas Wayne Batman being in play at the same time. Jor-El was the mysterious Mr. Oz, which was a mystery character that was played out over the course of maybe a year or so. I don't know, but it was a mystery character that was doing, quote unquote, just doing stuff in DC Universe, kidnapping people, just doing things. And I think that it's an important thing that Thomas Wayne active, Jor-El active, and that this is something that by design, by Dr. Manhattan, I guess he's the character that's like, well, what happens if this is here? And if I take this guy from here, put him there, well, what happens? Let me look and see. I guess not in a malicious way, but in a let me see what happens sort of way. It's designed to kind of break the characters almost and kind of hit them in a like super personal way that Superman is able to interact with Jor-El, and it's already in an antagonistic way before he even knows who it is. Mr. Oz is no ally, and just him being there throws off Superman in a profound way. And for his father to not be who he thought he was or who he'd even hoped to be, as far as what he thinks about things and what he feels should be happening, and how he is judging Kal-El's performance. Basically, just the fact that he's there just throws off everything instantly in a major way. So for those reasons, I think that that's allowable to get good story elements in those ways. And that's ever present throughout all these comics, that Jor-El is, and then at some point was there. It's just Superman's off his game at every turn.
I mean, do you enjoy Jor-El's role in these stories?
I think that he has a presence there that no other character could serve. He has a presence there that no other character could serve.
Yeah, but is that a good thing?
It's hard. It's hard for me to, because I read what I read, so it's hard for me to extract that, because there's a point where you need to have Jon Kent off the board and on an adventure, and he's not going to go with just anyone.
He could have gone with the Legion. I guess I don't mean to badger the witness. This is so funny to me. So for anyone, again, who's not familiar with Lord Retail, we have this whole bit in My Comic Shop Country about how cryptic you can be. And one of my favorite, I can't tell you how much fun this was to edit, but there's this bit in the movie where right before you let the customers into the midnight release, I ask you, how many copies of Action Comics 1000 did you order? And you go on for, 2 minutes, which is not a small amount of time when we're talking screen time, talking about why you ordered the way you did, but you never gave the number. And I even asked a follow-up at one point, and you never gave the number. And whether that was conscious or just you doing your thing, I don't know exactly where the line is, but it was so funny to me. And so, for those who know you, I know you like to play it real close to the vest. And so it's not, it's just for the record, it's not like I expected you to come on here and be like, this run sucks, or anything like that. And I'm not trying to get you to say that or anything like that, but it's just funny to me because it's like, yes, I agree. Jor-El serves a very unique, distinct function, but from us, I'll say it for myself. I don't like that. And I talked about this, and also I know Bendis inherited this, so I'm not even putting this on Bendis. But I had a big problem with this in the Oz Effect. I just feel that Jor-El and Lara perishing with Krypton is so core to this, initial tragedy that Kal-El suffers on his journey. And, there's something, very bittersweet about, being able to connect with the AI Jor-El in the fortress, but not being able to be in the physical presence. And I feel like you undermine that by bringing him back. And then this note of strong antagonism between them, it's, certainly you can mine it for the drama and the tension, but I feel like it takes away more than it adds. And that's the way I felt when they introduced, revealed him in the Oz Effect. And I feel this way here. And yeah, to your point, if we need to age up Jon, which raises a whole other question, or if we need to get Jon off on an adventure, again, I think there are other ways. I think the Legion of Superheroes would have been a way to do it. Now, again, I really want to stress this. I am open-minded with this, and we do get this backstory with Jor-El and this intergalactic council and everything. But again, I still can't tell you exactly what the takeaway was supposed to be from all of those dealings with this intergalactic council that decided the fate of worlds. Was it clear to you?
So, well, to roll it back just a little bit, my 2-minute distraction was to buy myself time to hopefully remember what that quantity was, because I could not remember the quantity of Action Comics. I was trying to buy myself time, and you saw through it, of course. But yeah, that's the honest truth. I could not remember, and I was like, I got to give him something. He's filming. I think that Jor-El's presence is one of those fathers and sons thing that comic books really like to do. And it wasn't a Jonathan Kent scenario. It was something not good. It was something not good, that relationship with Jor-El. I don't think it necessarily taints the character of Jor-El, because I don't feel like anybody has a pure and strong, immutable vision of Jor-El. I think that that's one of those characters that you either don't think about him at all, or whatever the current version is, that's probably what he was. Was he a John Byrne, cold and sterile scientist? Was he a Silver Age, pretty cool, pretty nice guy? Or was he this? Was he a cold and clinical super scientist, like science above everything, but also kind of weird and subject to emotional reaction, I guess? He was this like combination of things.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I guess because I don't care about Jor-El. I don't care about anything that happens on Krypton before it explodes. I don't care. That's why I was kind of flexible with this. And I kind of understood the fathers and sons aspect of it, because you had Jor-El, Kal-El, and Jon Kent, son, father, grandfather. You had them interacting, and grandfather was like, I am exercising my right to spend time with my grandson. And of course, the grandson's like, yeah, let me go on this adventure, which is different from Legion of Superheroes. Who are these characters? We need you to come with us. We don't know who you are. Like, I feel like that'd be a little more, it'd take more explaining than grandfather saying, let's go. Do you want to go somewhere? You want to go anywhere at all? Sure. But then very quickly, that whole situation gets out of control. And I think it was important not just we didn't just age up Jon Kent, which I'm gonna talk about Jon Kent in a little bit. We didn't just age him up. He experienced legitimate trauma at the hands of the crime syndicate. Legitimate trauma where he was tortured by people that looked like his parents. Ultraman, I'm not always clear on, is Ultraman Superman, Clark Kent, or is he just a guy with powers? But Superwoman, that is Lois Lane. So there were characters that looked like his parents for a extended period of time that tortured him physically and emotionally, and that's a thing. It wasn't just he got older. He experienced something terrible that even through the course of storytelling, I don't think he really imparted everything to them. He, of course, told them stuff, but there's just some things that unless you were there, you couldn't know. And you just feel so bad for Superman and Lois that this happened, and there's not a thing they could do about it.
Hold that thought. Let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. We'll be right back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere, via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. And we're back. So I just want to jump back to what you were saying about Jor-El for a second. Yeah, we have had different depictions of Jor-El, and aside from the John Byrne cold, sterile version of Krypton, which is my least favorite, I'm pretty open when it comes to other interpretations of the character. But, to your point about what do we think of when we think of Jor-El? For me, it just comes back to the idea of this father, the desperate scientist, but the father who, with his last act, gives his son a chance at life. This Hail Mary pass across the universe that the Kents catch. It's, it's so beautiful to me. And so, having Jor-El there, like I said, just kind of undermines it. And I also feel like we've seen, going back to my favorite, Smallville, we've seen other, or even, very recently I covered the Donner cut in particular of Superman 2 when I did my Donnerverse event. And, the tension in that movie as Superman wants to be with Lois and being told, well, you can't be Superman and be with Lois, and that whole business. And the very antagonistic relationship, very tension-filled dynamic between Clark and Jor-El on Smallville. I feel like there are ways to still have some of that drama and tension between them. I don't need Jor-El to physically be there and be unbalanced the way he is. But look, it is the way it is. And also, I'm not trying to convince you, to whatever extent it worked for you, that's good. I'm glad. I wish it worked more for me. For the Jon Kent of it all, yeah, they put this kid through hell. And as a parent, I felt Clark's frustration and rage. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of the story. I really felt that. Well, first, when Jon goes off, which the fact that, Lois and Clark would allow that, the fact that Lois would then leave after she realizes she's kind of in over her head, those are a couple of tough pills to swallow, especially as a parent. But I think the story did as convincing a job as you could. So I'll take it. But the fact, Clark's loneliness at the very beginning of the Superman series, when Lois and Jon are gone, I really felt that. Literally, as we're recording this, my wife has taken our son to her mother's in Jersey just for a few days. And it's like, I miss my little buddy. So I can, and I miss my wife as well, of course. But so I can imagine Clark's loneliness, and then the rage, the frustration when Jon comes back and Superman realizes he's missed out on 6 years of his son's development. So, that certainly packs a punch. I guess devil's advocate. The question I would ask is it worth it to lose out on this time watching the character, not so much even for Clark himself, but I'm saying for us, the reader, to miss out on this character evolving organically. And I talked about this before when this came up in another episode, but I guess sort of where I land on this aging of him. And I agree with you. It's not like he just goes through a wormhole and he pops up and he's 17. Like, he goes through a lot. He lives those 6 years. But I guess it's like, we know comics, it takes forever for there to be any real change, let alone a change that actually sticks. So the fact that it took decades and decades and 80 years before we got Jon Kent, and even from birth to, age 10 at the start of Rebirth, there was time we missed. And so I just felt like even if they had just let him age in real time and it took 6 or 7 years before he's in his late teens, it would have been worth it. So this decision to have him skip over that time, like I said, in the moment, it really does pack a punch. No doubt. You feel the frustration, the sadness over missing out on that time. But just like with Jor-El, I guess I wonder, does it take away more than it adds? That would be my question.
I'm no parent, but even I felt those moments. Even I felt those, loss of years. And, so you were just alone with these people. Like, I know what Crime Syndicate is, and that's where you were. That was effective to me. And I think that is more additive than simply going through a wormhole when you come out, you're 6 years older. I certainly didn't want 40 years of toddler Franklin Richards with Jon Kent. I didn't want that. And Jon Kent, he had a lot of content. I was not a Jon Kent fan. Connor Kent is my Superboy.
Fair enough.
So I was not for the idea. Didn't care for it. I know a lot of people really love the Super Sons idea. I know that a lot of people love the Peter Tomasi run on Superman, but that wasn't really. I'm not a diehard Superman fan, so unless something is motivating me to be there at this stage, it just wasn't what I was looking for. So I was no Jon Kent fan, but I am a fan of the concept of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. That means a lot to me. It doesn't mean a lot to most current readers. Why should it? DC Comics hasn't really invested in that concept in a very long time of A, Legion of Superheroes as an idea, B, that Superboy 1000% has a place there. So for me, I will grind up as many, young Jon Kents as need be to get Superboy with the Legion of Superheroes. That is priority one for me. And I got that.
No, I hear you. No, that's and that's the thing. I can appreciate that all of us come to this from different perspectives. And if Superboy and the Legion means a lot to you and this story got you there, I can appreciate that. So let me ask you, because I touched on this before, but being there with you in April 2018 and seeing the excitement from the customers for Action 1000 and seeing how excited they were when you were like, hey, everybody, I got Brian Michael Bendis on the phone. Like, they were excited. Over the course of Bendis's run on the books, which from my estimation, at least, he didn't end up staying as long as I think people probably figured he would based on his Marvel runs. So, we're not talking about the longest period of time, but over those couple of years, what sort of feedback did you get from customers? Was this something that people were continuing to add to their list? Were people dropping this? A little bit of both? Like, were people telling you they were really enjoying it? Like, what were you hearing from people about Bendis on Superman once we got past that initial excitement of that big night? Like, what was the vibe at the shop?
Sometimes the nature of today's world is if something is okay, if something is pretty good, you may not always hear that feedback. Like if something's like terrible or I hate this, you're probably going to hear that first rather than, positive feedback. But the way it is measured is through sales, through maintenance of consistent pre-order numbers. That's the way to measurement, that type of thing. Superman had a few more subscribers than Action Comics, not many more. Usually there's a difference between Action and Superman as there's a difference between Detective and Batman. More people get Batman than Detective. That's just how it goes. But I think that we're maintaining total orders of around 40 to 50 copies through the duration of Bendis's run. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but if you can maintain that, that's a good thing. Now, once Bendis left, though, I think that here there was a contingent of people that were here for Bendis Superman, not necessarily just for Superman, but at this store, his Marvel material, he has a reputation where it's like, oh, Bendis is writing this restaurant menu. Okay, let me get that then. So when he came over to Superman, there are people that followed, you follow your creators, and they followed him to that. Whereas now I think things have kind of coalesced to numbers that were going on prior to Rebirth and prior to Bendis Superman. I think is where we're at right now.
I hear you. And it's funny, we haven't even talked about this, but as far as like for speaking for myself, my fandom, my Bendis fandom, I generally speaking would say I am a fan. If we go back to the early 2000s, I was a huge Bendis fan. When he was on Ultimate Spider-Man, Alias, Daredevil, and Powers, that period of time, for me, that was peak Bendis. As the years went on and he got more into the Avengers work and the X-Men, I fell off a bit. And it wasn't even that I didn't like it. It was just, I'm a DC guy at heart. So the fact that I read as much Marvel as I did is a testament in large part to him and a few other creators. But, as we got deeper into his Marvel bibliography, I did fall off a bit. When they announced he was coming over to DC, I know a lot of fans, I know there were at least mixed feelings because a lot of people were into the Tomasi Gleason run on Superman in particular. For myself, I guess I didn't really have strong opinions. I was curious, I suppose, more than anything else. I was very pleasantly surprised when I read Man of Steel and I saw that he had the voice of the character down. I don't know specifically what some fans were like so worried about that Bendis would do, but I definitely got the sense there was some sort of concern about, either what sensibilities or plot developments he would introduce. But in the end, I think initially and throughout, we got a fairly traditional classic take on the character. I don't feel like, and and I'm not saying like, oh, it was, whatever. I appreciated the fact that he tapped into, like I said earlier, a lot of the core ideals while still making it feel fresh. But I guess my point is it wasn't as, earth-shattering as maybe some fans seem to feel it might be when this was first announced that Bendis is coming.
Well, there's always the thought of, okay, you're a DC reader, you're enjoying your family time with Jon Kent in the Superman title, and this Marvel guy's got to come over and break all the toys, is what the concern is. Because you may not have read any Marvel content. Maybe you've heard the name, but what you do know is that someone is coming over, is disrupting something that is stable for you. So there's always that worry. But I think that overall, Bendis was able to reintroduce some elements that had gone from Superman content or had been gone for 30, 40 years, where an audience simply wasn't accustomed to these things that were indeed elements of Superman comics. I think that he reintroduced supporting cast. Supporting cast is just hard to manage in comic books. It just is. So most writers are not going to attempt to do it. Outside of, I know that Dan Slott can manage supporting cast pretty well, but otherwise, and I don't consider, Alfred is not supporting cast. He's basically a main character, but Bendis was able to, just the Daily Planet and all of those people, named characters that had their own things they wanted to do, things that they felt and cared about. He introduced the fire chief. I can't remember what her name was.
Yeah, Melody Moore.
Yeah, he introduced a character that interacted with Superman a couple of times around Metropolis as a fire chief. And I guess you kind of began to wonder, like, what's that guy's deal? And of course, at the time, he couldn't reveal, he was married, so you'd kind of have to deflect a little bit. And she wasn't like coming at him super hard, but he was trying to be polite. But at the same time, it's like, well, thank you, see you later. Yeah, trying to maintain the identity. That's something that's a supporting cast type of thing that had been absent even during the, during the Triangle years. Stuff like that could pop up. That sort of thing could pop up.
Yeah, I mean, the Triangle era, I would almost argue, was the last real time that we had meaningful time with the supporting cast. I feel like in more recent years, they have fallen by the wayside. So yeah, to your point. And I thought one thing that I've never worked in a newsroom, but I felt like he did a really nice job of capturing the vibe of the Daily Planet newsroom. I really did like that a lot. I like that Perry and Jimmy got played. There's a great, I took a screenshot of him, a really gorgeous page from one of the Man of Steel issues with Perry, where he's just so weary and haggard, and he's, slumped over his desk, and it's like, we have to show people what they don't know yet. We have to do it every day, multiple times a day. And like, you just see how much it's, the current news game and his lengthy tenure at the Planet, how much it's worn him down. So yeah, stuff like that was cool. I mean, other than the supporting cast, what are some of the things that you're kind of thinking of when you're saying that he brought back stuff that we hadn't seen in a long time?
So you've got Superman really measuring his strength. There are so many deliberate moments where he can't or wouldn't dream of fully unleashing. There are moments where, like, he's being tossed around by somebody, but he'll use his skill to not crash through a window. Let me not do that, because you know what? I know how to not do that. Sometimes it's not in his control, but this is an experienced character, and he's thinking in those ways. He has that in his mindset that perhaps brute strength isn't the way. He's always thinking of, what can I do that's different? What technology is available to me? Is there someone I can call? He has these things constantly in mind. And I think that's important for a multitude of reasons, that he's a smart guy. And that's something that, I guess in All-Star Superman, he was a genius. He was an outright genius.
Right.
But during our Triangle years, he was a nice guy, right? But in this, he is very smart. He would prefer to, when dealing with an opponent, like, can we talk about this? Are you sure you want to do this? Or there are moments where he simply arrives and, people are up to something shady. They're like, all right, wrap it up. He's here. He must know something. He must be able to use his X-ray vision. He must see something. Wrap all this up. Shut it down. So that's what I mean as far as some things that maybe fell away from the character or people had not seen the character do. And it was kind of subtle. It's not too overstated, but it's consistent throughout the material. It's consistent.
No, I hear you. I mean, honestly, that's what I enjoyed most was that characterization. And it's funny, I talked about this when we did the Rebirth episodes. It was unfortunate to me that, with some exception, we didn't get a lot of Superman's internal narration in those Tomasi and Jurgens runs. And I miss that. I like getting into Clark's head and hearing what he's thinking and hearing from him in that way. And Bendis gave us that. And I really appreciated that. And again, I felt he captured the voice, and there was in that narration and in the dialogue too, but generally speaking, the way that Bendis depicted Clark and Superman, I think it honored the experience that he has, the wisdom he's gained. But again, when we're talking about this relatability, there was a humor and a self-deprecating quality in certain respects and a self-awareness that I really, really appreciated. There's one moment where Clark is at his desk and he's going to write an article about his new Fortress of Solitude, and he stops himself and he's like, oh, this is just ego. Like, is there something else you can write about? And like, he catches himself and it's like, oh, like, that's a great moment. And when he's very upset, I think this is after Jon has come back older, and he's looking for something to hit. And he's like, oh, you can't just hit an asteroid every time you're mad, but like, let me patrol. And if I happen to see something that needs to be hit, and he finds Mongol like showing up at the fortress and he just clocks him, like, stuff like that was great. And yeah, to your point, I love when we're in that big three-way space battle with their various alien races, like from Tamaran and the various places where, and the Thanagarians, and he's able to get almost all of them, I think, to stand down, like you said, with a look or a please. One of the cases, he's like, stop this, please. And they listen to him. So, there was a lot of really great stuff like that. When he's fighting Mongol, there's this great bit where he's talking about how he doesn't always like himself in battle, and he doesn't like the things that he has to do, whether it's using violence or speaking in a certain way to try to get through to some of these adversaries. So yeah, from a character perspective, I really, really dug all of that. One question I wanted to ask you, again, going back to the retail side, because in our other projects, we've talked a lot about, for you in particular, and I know this is true for a lot of other shops, but for you in particular, the value of hand selling, of being able to tell someone, hey, you really need to check this out, and here's why. Or if you like this, you'll really like that. And I'm curious, both when the book was coming out, but even now, because it lives on in trades, right? The however many volumes, the Superman run is 4 volumes. You got Man of Steel, you got the action stuff, you got your set of Bendis Superman collections. How do you pitch this to people, and what do you need to see or hear from someone to make you say, oh, they would really like this Bendis run on Superman?
Well, occasionally a person will come in and want something Superman, and that's a whole other conversation. The management of the Superman brand, where there are not as many people coming in saying, show me a good Superman story. I'd say there's one for every 30 people saying, I want to see something Batman today. And that's not a small thing. That's a significant thing, that a marquee character such as Superman, his standing isn't what it should be with the general public, or with kids for that matter. But if someone asks for a Superman story, I'm probably going to show them Kingdom Come first and foremost. I'll show them that. But if they want something more ongoing, if it's like, all right, already read this, All-Star Superman, already did it. Is there something else I could read? I will lead with Man of Steel, of course, and I will say, the Superman's origin, Krypton explodes, he's sent to Earth. Well, what if I told you that someone was responsible for Krypton's destruction? That wasn't entirely a natural event. What if other places knew about it, didn't do anything to stop it because they didn't like Krypton? Then what? And what if Superman comes into contact with this individual? Then what happens? And usually that's enough for someone to say, all right, let me see what this is talking about. Usually that's enough. And I think this is an opportunity to get backwards and talk about that Intergalactic Council, which I think it's somewhat logical. I think that it comes from, wasn't there some type of group of characters in the DC universe, like Phantom Stranger, person and that person?
The quintessence, if memory serves, yes.
Yes, which there was a Guardian there. So there's precedent for larger than life entities operating together. So in this case, you had a lot of your universal powers, which DC has a lot of worlds that I think aren't given their proper due. But in this one, like Tamaran meant nothing to me because I'm not a New Teen Titans person. But with this, I'm like, okay, Tamaran, Ran, Thanagar, Oa, they're aware of one another. They've been around for a very long time. I guess they're in some type of proximity to one another. And they talk to each other about things. They've set policy about things. They intervene in situations together for the mutual benefit of all, I guess. So I found that to be a pretty interesting concept. But I guess they had an enforcer, like a warlord, that if there's a situation and it's got to be handled, shut down with force, send this guy. He'll handle it. He'll send a message. Problem will be solved. The less we know about it, the better. The fact that they had such an entity that they could agree upon employing from time to time, and this entity who knew all of their secrets, did not like Krypton, and actually made a case for, look, this planet Krypton, the way they do things, the way they're going to annex other places, they're going to just spread all over the galaxy. You guys got to do something. We do something about other places all the time. Got to do something about Krypton, or it's going to be a serious problem. And they didn't want to do that. Couldn't be attached to any such conversation at all. But they also didn't warn anybody. They didn't say, hey, Krypton, you got a thing coming your way. This is a serious issue. You guys got to solve it. They didn't do anything about it. And that's a pretty significant thing. I like I like the Godfather movies, and I kind of looked at it in those terms, I guess, as far as like, okay, the families agree on this thing. Somebody's going to make a move on one of the families and they kind of look the other way on it. That's how I looked at that scenario in that terminology. That nobody really liked Krypton. I think that's an interesting concept. What if people didn't like that place?
That is interesting. I don't have an issue with that, and nor do I begrudge this council its existence. I think it is an interesting take. I guess, like when you said, like, oh, there's a serious thing that's coming, we're not going to warn anyone. What are you referring to? Is it that Krypton's on the verge of a natural destruction, or this Rogol Zaar is going to destroy it?
That Rogol Zaar he's gonna try his best to find some way to take out Krypton, and they knew that.
So here's the thing that just doesn't track for me. So Jor-El has these scientific findings that...
Yes, that's still there, yes.
Okay, so that's still there, yet the Science Council, as always, denies this, and this Intergalactic Council similarly says, no, we've had our own people look into it, there's nothing there, right? So is the planet on the verge of destruction from what Jor-El is seeing, or is it Rogol Zaar who is making this happen? Or is it both? Is Rogol Zaar in there causing these things is that the idea that Rogol Zaar is tinkering with the planet's sun or core or whatever it is, and it's causing Jor-El to have these findings, but the council is denying it because they know it's actually Rogol Zaar and they want to let this happen? Is that the idea?
From having read this recently, it looked like Krypton was still going to have some type of natural something was going on, and Jor-El really wanted the circle. He wanted those people to go to the council and say, look,
right,
it's not just Jor-El. We know that at some point Krypton is going to have to be evacuated. We can receive your refugees because you're eventually going to have to leave this place. But Rogol Zaar expecting to perish himself, which is why I didn't like his disfigurement. I thought that looked weird. I liked the way he looked prior to being disfigured. He made something happen very quickly, almost immediately.
So like your interpretation is that it was more a matter of timing. Like Krypton is going to meet its own end, but Rogol Zaar and the council just can't wait. Like Rogol Zaar's got to get in there and do what he needs to do and hasten the destruction of Krypton. Because I guess this is where, not to get so worked up about this, but it bothered me that I didn't like the idea of this, but it's like I was open to seeing how it would unfold and hopefully it would be worthwhile, even if I didn't necessarily agree with the choice. But here, in terms of the execution, I really just felt like I read all those issues and I still can't really tell you exactly what the deal was. Because I guess my feeling is if Jor-El was right and there was some natural event that was about to befall Krypton, the council is telling him no, which would make sense if they want Krypton gone. But then I guess I don't get the role that Rogol Zaar plays or has to play, other than, again, a matter of timing to make it happen faster. That they hate Krypton so much that they can't wait for the planet to die on its own.
And it's not a hate so much as just like, Krypton, what do you want this time? What do you want? And it's also, again, the fact that Rogol Zaar knew all their secrets. He knew all these various things, and I think that they couldn't be attached to any part of this. It couldn't get out that they'd even had this type of discussion at all. So Krypton was eventually going to face something, and again, no one wanted to receive their refugees. They didn't want to do that, and I guess there was fear that maybe Kryptonians will take over our world the way they seem to do other places, and they just sort of collectively looked the other way. It's like, oh, did Zaar actually do that thing that he said he was going to do? That's crazy. Who could have anticipated this?
Fair enough, and again, I don't mean to put you in the hot seat as if you wrote this. I mean, I guess it's still not clear to me what the real source of Rogol Zaar's intense hatred was. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, in the Superman run, we only get that one line. I think it's Adam Strange telling Superman, or has Superman figured it out himself? Some information has been conveyed off panel where it is said that Jor-El created Rogol Zaar.
Yes, you get that. Again, it's not like a major thing the way you think it would be. Also, when the grand finale battle takes place at the remains of Krypton, and Kryptonians are feeling the radiation of the
Right, yes.
kryptonite there, and Rogol Zaar is feeling it too. It's like you are Kryptonian. That makes this even worse. What's going on here? But yeah, it's a lot of moving parts and pieces that were in this whole story for sure.
Look, and again, I'm not, if it worked for you and you liked it, did you like it?
I'm not that attached to, like, I don't want there to have been some ulterior motive. I don't want the Waynes to have been set up in Crime Alley. I don't want that. But I don't mind this idea that Krypton was part of a a galactic community, which they've never really gotten into that before, that Krypton is part of a global intergalactic community, and that maybe they were not viewed favorably. And when they were in trouble, nobody was there for them. I think that it doesn't exactly change. It doesn't change too much. You still get Kal-El being sent away. You still get almost everything is still there, in my opinion. Almost everything is still there as far as the characters reacting. And it gives Superman a character in Rogol Zaar that he's like, I think I hate this guy. I think he has to really consider, do I need to dispense final justice with this individual, because this is too much. Also, the thing I didn't like, the destruction of Kandor. I didn't like that. That was the bottle city of Kandor is in Superman's care in the fortress. Rogol Zaar, I guess I don't know how old he is. I've never been clear on how old was Krypton when it blew up. I never was clear on, like, is there hyperspace travel? Never know. At any rate, I think he's probably pretty old. And he discovers there's a Kryptonian somewhere. He's on Earth. This guy has a whole, like, city of Kryptonians in his house. This is outrageous to me. I didn't like that Kandor was murdered off panel. That was pretty harsh. That wasn't a small thing for me.
Yes, that was brutal. So for me, obviously, I do have other stronger feelings about the origin story and the destruction of Krypton, but it's not just I want it to be a natural disaster because that's the version I'm familiar with. I do think it's more compelling. I think there's something grander and more mythic. I feel like it reduces it to some degree if it's a villain who was behind it. And I do also think, and this, I can't take credit for this. This was one of our guests shared his view on this in a recent episode. Shout out to Scott. But this idea that, Krypton can be this cautionary tale. Like, this is a planet that, abused its resources and didn't, maybe take all of the steps that it should have. And the planet met an untimely end. And the fact that the planet ignored the warnings of Jor-El. Now that factor is still in place, which I can appreciate. So, again, the fact that someone was behind it, for me, definitely not a fan. And in terms of the Rogol Zaar of it all, it's like, no, I needed more of an explanation of why. I mean, I agree. They give you enough of the breadcrumbs of he was Kryptonian and Jor-El created him and I guess felt betrayed or something. I guess what I keep coming up against with this is I don't disagree when you say, like, it's interesting that the rest of the galaxy didn't like Krypton and they were maybe aggressive in their trade practices. It's like, that's actually interesting. I like that. That's fine. The fact that, Jor-El is part of this council and they've done some shady things and there's tension there. Again, it's not an issue. I think where I felt jerked around with this run was issue after issue, the promise of, like, the secrets will be revealed, all will be revealed. And I was waiting for something that would make me feel like, oh, this is a valuable payoff. This makes all of this worth it. I don't like the idea that some guy killed Krypton, but you know what? I get it now. And I just never got there. And so that's where a lot of this just kind of fell flat for me. But on a positive note, and then, circle back to whatever else you want to talk about with Rogol Zaar. But I did like the way in which, as this story unfolded, the Unity saga, it positioned Zod and Kal-El as unlikely allies. And I did like that. And I thought that was that rang true, that Zod, for all of their differences, It's like Zod, more than anyone, wants to preserve Krypton and bring Krypton back. So the idea that someone killed Krypton, of course he would hate that guy. That aspect and the ultimate truce that the House of El and the House of Zod are able to achieve, I thought that was really interesting. So that aspect of it, I was on board with.
So did you want the secret to be revealed to you or the secret to be revealed to the characters in the story? Like when you said that you're waiting for the secret. Like, I think that the secret wasn't necessarily, I think we already knew what the secret was as readers, but I think it was the DC universe, characters, having all this information revealed to them. I think that's what the secret is out now. That's how I interpreted it anyway.
I mean, I don't know. I felt like the flip. I felt like when Adam Strange and Clark are talking about, Jor-El created Krypton, I felt like you have information that you got from somewhere that I, as the reader, don't feel like I, again, unless I really missed something. I read a couple of the Supergirl issues that tied in, and I know she had her whole quest where she went out to find the truth, and I don't know, maybe there's a little bit more context there, but in any event, I don't want to belabor the point, and there are other aspects to touch on. One thing that was interesting with this run, I know Action Comics was more earthbound and was dealing with the Leviathan of it all. I like I said, I how do I put this? I didn't have any interest in that. From what I heard about the story, I didn't want to invest the time in going through all of that. So I figured we'll just focus on Superman. But, Superman ended up being largely spacebound, not exclusively, but largely. One major exception, of course, is the Truth arc. So, this is one of the other big tent poles of this run that we haven't gotten into yet. So we can talk, we can circle back to anything else. But what is your take on Clark deciding to out himself to the world?
I'm undecided on how I feel about that as far as why did he do it? He had just gotten this information. Well, just that, his father was participating in things that were not above board, such as, was there Kryptonian involvement in creating Doomsday, or am I making that up? I don't remember. You remember back that, like, Hutter Prey, was Doomsday something that Kryptonians made?
Yeah, he was a Kryptonian experiment.
Okay, and I don't know if that still is in play. I have no idea, but that his father participated in various things that were not above board, and I wonder if, had he not interacted with Jor-El, lost Jor-El in the means that he did, would he have made such a drastic choice? I don't know if he would have. I think that's part of those turns of events played a role in his deciding to do this thing. I'm not sure. There is a logic in it. There's specifically an issue where Dr. Fate checks to see, is this some sort of magical manipulation that went on? Let's run you through some tests to make sure that's not what this was. And it wasn't. But just to be thorough, they covered that aspect of it. But I don't know. The secret identity is something that is becoming rarer and rarer in comic books. As far as marquee characters, it's what, Spider-Man and Batman? For marquee, like, mainstream characters, that's about it, as far as I can recall. Nightwing aside, Daredevil, variable, but I think as far as marquee characters, those are the last two.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously I thought about all of this beforehand, but as we're talking about it, I guess this theme is emerging for me when we talk about virtually all of these decisions that were made and played out in this run, where I know I keep saying it, but this idea of losing more than we get. And I feel like with Clark outing himself, you get some interesting story. You get those moments, the one page, the silent page of Clark going into Perry's office, closing the door, ripping open the shirt, Perry going over and giving him a hug. That's a beautiful moment. Jimmy and Clark have a similarly, or it's a different tone, right? It's more amusing because Lois had already told Jimmy. So, that was amusing. The
Batman Wonder Woman reaction, just the two of them talking about this, that was the thing.
Yeah. So, you get the initial benefit of that. And I guess it, to the extent that they explored this notion of Clark minus glasses, right? Everyone knows his identity, continuing to work at the Daily Planet. is interesting, I guess, to an extent. It feels wildly untenable and unrealistic, but okay, it's different. I'll give them that. And then this might be where, as Superman fans with different levels of passion for the character and certain aspects of the character, I think this is where, like, for me, the secret identity definitely feels like an indelible part of the character, and I like what the identity allows him to do. And I feel like you take that away, you can still have him at the planet working as Clark the reporter, who everyone knows as Superman, but in the way that he's experiencing the world and the world is receiving him, it's that old dynamic is completely gone. Now, on the flip side, so much of this run was spacebound. And in the current comics, and actually, just to tee up our next episode, in the next episode, I'm going to be taking a look at Philip Kennedy Johnson's Warworld saga in Action Comics. But that's an arc where he's off planet. So, it's one of those things where it's like, I can't believe they outed Clark, but I don't know. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of these stories where it doesn't matter. It's like he's not even on Earth, for a lot of this. So I don't know. In the end, I do think that the story was well told. I liked the idea that this was a decision Clark made as opposed to being outed, a la the New 52 storyline. Yeah. So this was at least a different spin on it. It was a choice he made. And I liked the moments that it allowed to have happen. And this is comics, so it's like you kind of figure at some point they'll put the genie back in the bottle. Although, to your point, they might not, given this current trend, which is its own conversation. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it's like, oh, that's a shame to lose that.
I did get, listening to interviews and reading various articles, I did get the feeling that maybe Bendis would have been on those titles a lot longer. Now, if that was the case, and you're going to make a move like that, then you do have time to really explore it and unpack it. If you are, my name is Clark Kent, I'm Superman, this is the building that I work in, I'll be there on Monday morning. Like, somebody's going to test that. Somebody can't stop themselves from testing that. But we never really got to fully expand upon those things. There's a couple of things. The magical opponent, Xanadoth, we got to see more of that in Justice League. That's what the Justice League was dealing with on Bendis' last couple issues there. So that was expanded upon there. And there's a few other little things that got picked up on in Justice League. But that was kind of a big thing that I felt like, okay, like, wow, we're going to be dealing with this for years to come. And we kind of weren't. Because, as you said, the other Superman titles didn't really run with that ball. They didn't carry that Jor-El into their storylines, so to speak. Brief aside, not a fan of Warworld. I've never liked that idea. It bugs me that it continues to exist in the DC universe. And I'm not saying that just because of Coast City and what happened there, but just the concept of Mongol, I've never, outside of what's that Alan Moore annual?
Oh, for the man who has everything.
Outside of that one, where Mongol was able to briefly thoroughly defeat Superman. Outside of that, he really does seem like just out of place. He's just not a worthy opponent, in my opinion. And that even got into it a little bit, where Mongol receives word that Superman is revealed, that I was a regular person living and working among you the whole time. And for a brief second, it appeared that Mongol was like, well, so he wasn't doing it for this reason or this reason, like I do. Like, well, maybe I could. And as soon as he has that realization, he's, instantly killed by his son, because I guess there's been 1,700 Mongols over however period of time. But it seemed like he had a moment of realization that would have been nice to explore, but that's not Mongol. That's not the character. He doesn't get to have that. So you had a even worse version of Mongol that was in play.
Yeah. I do like the character of Mongol. I feel like he's one of the rare villains who can engage on a physical and intellectual level, though obviously that's the physicality that's the primary focus. But I do like Mongol, and I mean, a lot of this stems back to the reign of the Superman, and then more recently going back and really delving into the Exile storyline from the late 80s, early 90s. So there's some good Mongol stuff. What's interesting is, we got Mongol, but otherwise, Bendis really added a lot of new, or attempted to add a lot of new villains like Rogol Zaar, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Sinmar. Is that what in the final storyline?
Yes, that's a subject that came up in Justice League later. That it was almost a different take on Krypton, I guess. It was almost a different, I guess that race of beings, they observed Superman and how he functioned on Earth, and they were taken aback, basically, and they created their own Superman. Like, we'll just make one. We'll make a Superman. We'll get a volunteer. We'll generate a Superman that will fulfill our wishes and whims. And it's almost like a negative reversal on the whole idea, behind Superman. But yeah, that came up later in Justice League, where that character returned, and Superman, he knew what that was. The Justice League didn't really know what the threat level was, but they figured it out pretty fast. I'm looking over my notes to see if there's anything that I didn't really cover.
Yeah. What else have we not talked about? There's one other big thing that I want to ask you about, but what else have we not talked about yet that you wanted to, that's on your notes?
Let's see. Earth getting drawn into the Phantom Zone. That was a cool moment that I don't feel like we'd seen it before. And that seemed like a very Silver Age thing to do. Like, oh no, the Earth itself has fallen into the Phantom Zone where all the bad guys are. But it was also handled in such a way that, okay, we're going to be running out of air very soon because that's not in the Phantom Zone. There's various problems. How do we get out of this? Where Superman was having to think quickly about some, possibilities and ideas, but also do physical combat. We got to see Nuclear Man briefly. Did you appreciate that?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, I did appreciate that.
That was a nice touch. How much Christopher Reeve do you feel visually and in sentiment was in this Superman run? I feel like there were really some moments that were, as far as like demeanor, you said that there were moments of like a little sense of humor. Visually, I think there was a lot of that Superman era of presentation in this content.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's funny. I don't know that I don't disagree, but I don't know that was necessarily smacking me in the face either as I was reading it. And maybe in part because this is a Superman in a context and having dynamics that that the movie didn't take the Christopher Reeve version of the character. So he's a husband and he's a father, and so I don't know. I think that colored it a little differently for me, but yeah, I mean, I can certainly see what you're saying for sure.
And also, back to Jor-El briefly. This is also a Jor-El that observed at least all of New 52 DC Comics unfolding, which wasn't necessarily our characters and our concepts at their best. So that also contributed to his just being thoroughly dismayed, confused, and not necessarily an ally. Not someone you could trust because you just didn't know. He had seen a lot of stuff and didn't necessarily impart that to, Superman and Lois, that was the case. He'd seen a lot of stuff that really twisted and deranged him also. So it wasn't right before Krypton explodes, we have Jor-El here. Like, he'd been around just watching stuff until he started taking action.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So, yeah, I mean, and that's true. It's not like it's necessarily undermining the Jor-El who was on Krypton at the moment of its destruction, but rather what happened after. But kind of on that note, that was the other thing I wanted to bring up. Jor-El's final fate. So he is sentenced to return to the moment of his death without a moment for a farewell with his son.
Yeah, that was a real moment where Jor-El had participated in some things. He had done some things while he was in service of finding Jon Kent, because there comes a point where even he doesn't know where he is. He had equally done some shady dealings. He'd done a lot of things. And the recently formed United Planets, which is a Legion of Superheroes concept, that was a big moment for me. We'd never seen the origins of the United Planets. It was just always there. So we got to see the circumstances through which these disparate worlds came into agreement. And one of the first things that they did together is try, sentence, and execute Jor-El before Superman even knew what was happening. So he did not get to say a word to Jor-El. And where he was sent to, where he was punished, is he was sent back to moments after the rocket ship had left, where it was just Jor-El and Lara. This disfigured older Jor-El was able to say, he does it, he brings them all together. Then Krypton's gone.
It was a powerful moment. I really enjoyed a couple of decades earlier when Mark Waid's Birthright ended with a very similar moment of Superman and the present being able to reach Jor-El and Lara in the past and deliver this message that I made it. So I like the idea of it. I liked it better the first time, I guess. At this point, I was so kind of over this version of Jor-El that, again, the ending didn't mean much to me, to be perfectly honest. Now, other people feel differently. I had actually a shout out to listener Tim Bruns. Tim, when we did our discussion of the Action Comics Oz Effect storyline, Tim sent me this lovely essay defense of Jor-El as Mr. Oz and the importance of, being open to, different interpretations and things like that. And, all of his points were well taken. And for him or anyone else who this all worked for, I guess the one thing I would clarify is it's not that I object. Wait, let me take that again. I do feel strongly about the origin story, about certain aspects of the origin story. I cannot deny that, but I am open to divergences from that if I feel that they're executed well. And between the Oz Effect and here, I just did not feel that way. I wish I did, but I just did not feel that way about Mr. Oz. So it's not just that, this undermines the origin. That's a big part of it for me. I cannot deny that, but it's also in the way that it plays out. But, at least it tidied up that Jor-El business, hopefully once and for all. It's still shocking to me. I guess in my mind, especially reading the Oz Effect, I always assumed that when that genie was eventually put back in the bottle, it would have undone, it would have undone this period of time where he existed in the present as Mr. Oz. But no, I mean, it all happens and he goes back and he perishes with his younger self.
And I guess if you think about it, not many characters even saw him, or if they did see him, they wouldn't necessarily know who he was, as far as damage to the space-time continuum and whatnot. And I think there is context for Jor-El and Thomas Wayne both being active in comics at the same time. Now, Thomas Wayne, Batman, he's very much still around for the most part. He has action figures. He's a known quantity. He has statues, whereas Mr. Oz, Jor-El, there'll be a point where, do we even remember what that was? I don't know. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, Superman and Batman and where they stand with the public. If I had to put money on it, I think however long it takes, eventually this will get retconned and we'll find out that wasn't the real Jor-El who showed up in the present. That's entirely possible. And Supergirl's side mission was to get confirmation. Is any of this correct, or is this just the ravings of some lunatic we've never even seen before? So she was able to confirm everything that's being said is so. All of it is correct. And it was good to see Superman and Supergirl working together. You and I both know the Matrix Supergirl, or Linda Danvers, Earth Angel Supergirl, which was fine, but I kind of liked... So are you of the opinion that there should be less Kryptonians, like maybe under 5 Kryptonians anywhere, or it's okay if there's some Kryptonians around? It's so funny because I literally just recorded an episode that people will have heard by now, but this just came up, and so I don't want to rehash what the whole spiel I gave in the other episode. But I don't need for Kal-El to be the sole survivor. I think there is room for others, as long as it doesn't undermine that original central tragedy, and that the other Kryptonians who are there in a way that
that opens up a new wrinkle or a new dynamic. So I'm actually all for Kara Zor-El because she has a whole different perspective, right? She had a life on Krypton. She has those memories of Krypton. Her whole reason for being, to protect her little baby cousin, is completely undermined when she shows up and he's grown. So there's a lot to explore there. While at the same time, it does give Clark a connection, a direct, tangible connection to his homeworld that he didn't have before. But it's not like his entire family is there either. So there's still, again, I think that central tragedy, that initial tragedy, is still preserved. And then similarly with the Kryptonian criminal Zod, Zod mainly, that's a whole other. The Phantom Zone aspect, I'm totally okay with, and there's something, very poetic and bittersweet about this idea that like there are all these other Kryptonians out there, but they're the worst of the worst, and anytime they escape or he gives them a chance at redemption, he ultimately has to banish them. So I'm on board with that. What about you? Where do you land?
It almost, just hearing you say that, it almost doesn't reconcile that. Why does Krypton have criminals to begin with? In the Silver Age, they had legit criminals. Now, I think in the John Byrne stuff, maybe it was people that had a different line of thinking that was not part of, the Kryptonian law, basically. If you diverge from that, you probably got to go. But, in the Phantom Zone, we saw Jack Sawyer. I don't know if you picked up on that. And I think he's a Silver Age character, but I mainly know him from the Superman animated series.
Yes.
It's where I know him from. Because I only knew Zod, Ursa, and Nun. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I knew them, but, there were other characters around. And it was interesting to see him, and that he was convinced by Rogol Zaar, who was put in the Phantom Zone, because where else are you going to put the guy? He was able to rally troops, including some Kryptonians, to his cause. He was able to do that. I think I vary. I think that you don't want. I don't like the idea of there being massive cities or planets full of Kryptonians. But at the same time, I think it is okay for certainly Supergirl, a proper Supergirl. At first, when they did that transition, I knew Matrix. I knew that artificial Supergirl character. That's what I knew. And I didn't want his cousin from Krypton. I didn't want it. But that moment during the big epic battle where Superman realized, I am here. Jor-El is over there. My son, John, is right there. Kara Zor-El is over there. The House of El is here. We're going to figure this out. Oh,
Crypto.
Crypto, and there's General Zod. He's here too. So we're collectively going to figure out the situation and get it solved. So I think that's not something that I get hung up on, how many, if there's a lot of Kryptonians or not. But I also didn't like seeing Kandor, offhandedly, off panel, destroyed.
It's funny though you mentioned about, should they've even had that many criminals if there's such this advanced society? Well, so having just rewatched the Donner cut of Superman 2, Jor-El explains to Lex Luthor in the Fortress that virtually all of the criminal element on Krypton, virtually everyone was able to be rehabilitated, save these three. So it definitely plays with that idea that this is generally not an issue for Krypton, but that Zod and Nan and Ursa were these exceptions. Now, certainly in other depictions in the animated series, in the comics, you definitely get the sense that the Phantom Zone is like littered with with these rogue elements. Maybe that, although they didn't get into this, but maybe that's part of the reason why other planets in the galaxy don't like Krypton. Their criminal justice system and how they're just throwing people into this limbo dimension. Maybe that's part of it.
It seemed to me that Superman didn't put Nuclear Man in there. That seemed like he'd been there from perhaps Kryptonian days, is what that looked like to me.
Yeah, for sure. I did appreciate that nod. I too liked when the Earth was pulled into the Phantom Zone. I think the Superman arc, the Superman series got off to a solid start with that initial arc. There were a couple of places where, like at the end of the Man of Steel miniseries, when Superman is battling Rogol Zaar in space and really not quite sure how he's going to win, and we get the Deus Ex Machina of Supergirl showing up with the Phantom Zone projector. it gives Superman an easy out. I did appreciate the moment where he's like, oh, like, I wish I had thought of that. So there's that moment. And then similarly, when the Earth is in the Phantom Zone and they pull the Earth out, right? But Superman is still in there in the midst of this battle, and Zod and Rogol Zaar are going at it. And, Superman is really faced with this decision of like, what do I let them tear each other apart? Do I let, Zod hopefully take care of Rogol Zaar? Do I intervene? What do I do? And before he can make that decision, he is pulled back by the Atom, who has figured out how to retract him from the Phantom Zone.
They thought they were helping, and they were, but
I guess my point is there were a couple of moments where Superman was faced with a really interesting dilemma, and it would have been interesting to see what he would have actually done had he not been given an out.
But I think that these are things that we want. Those are things I want to see in a Superman comic. Now, do I need to see him wrestling with like, what do I do? Versus I want to see him at least considering I gotta figure something out, because this could go one of two ways. At least having the awareness to consider those things is something that we don't always see in our characters. I think that this run was littered with moments like that.
What did you think of the way in which the Lois and Clark relationship was depicted here, and maybe even more so in Action Comics, which again I did not read?
Action Comics was a lot of dealing with Metropolis has an organized crime element. How could they possibly operate when this is Superman's home base? How do they get things done? Because they have things that they do. There's a supervillain that, because of how they work, they might possibly be able to. They could maybe kill Superman. They're trying, and they think that they have the ability to do it. And it's actually someone that works at the planet. So there's that secret identity. It's not really well, I guess it was kind of a mystery character for a while, but it's someone that's interacting with Clark Kent at work and is battling Superman out in the city. I appreciate that Lois knows how things work, but not in a Mary Jane knows how Spider-Man's world works. She seems like she's part of the team. She's not just like, oh, go do the things you go do. She is part of the team. She's part of the team. But as far as the family dynamic, she was weirded out by Jor-El. And I think that she maybe didn't quite know how much she should vocalize in that situation, as a human amongst, these two. It's a Kryptonian situation at that point, not just a, father-in-law kind of thing. This is a Kryptonian situation. I did like that she wanted to go supervise John's trip with Jor-El, but there did come some moments such as I think they were somewhere and people figured out, this is King Superman's wife. Like, she's here to help us. She's going to fix all of our problems. And just some things were popping up where it made sense for me that she might leave. Sometimes characters don't do the right thing so much as like the logical thing. I could see someone saying, you know what? I think things are okay. You guys are in good shape. I'm going to go now, and I'll see you in a couple days when you come back.
Reading just the solo Superman title, I really didn't run into many issues of not knowing what was going on in the other books. And, there were references here and there to Leviathan. And obviously I knew that was the main storyline in Action. So, I wasn't lost. But, the first arc deals with Earth and the Phantom Zone. And then right after that, Jon Kent reemerges, right, as the 17-year-old. And he's like, where's Mom? And Clark takes him to the apartment where Lois is staying, and we had not seen her come back in the pages of Superman. So there was that moment where I was like, what the hell is going on here? And so I did skim through a little bit of Action Comics, and I know there was a whole bit where she came back and she didn't tell Clark initially, and she was working on her book, and they were trying a less traditional lifestyle sort of thing where I don't know how clear this was in Action. It seemed like maybe they weren't living together full time. She was off writing a lot. There seemed to be a little bit of that going on. Am I off on that?
I don't remember how accentuated it was, but yeah, she was trying to do, she was trying to do some career stuff. she was. But I don't remember how accentuated that was, because you had your organized crime story and you had your Leviathan story, which you would think that type of pervasive, there's agents everywhere, this entity has just knocked out all DC Comics' spy networks, so they're the only game in town as far as information and access to equipment. You wouldn't think of Superman when you think of that type of story, which I think that might have been the good part, to put Superman in the middle of that situation where he can't just hit or lift something to solve it, because it's this thing you can't put hands on it, because it's everywhere. It's ahead of you. It just left before you got there. I thought that was kind of interesting, in my opinion.
I'll admit, like I said, I didn't read Action. I've not read Bendis' Justice League, nor have I read his Legion of Superheroes. It's not that I hated this reading assignment. There were definitely things I enjoyed, as I've said. At the same time, when we talk about the Bendis era on the super titles, I think I'm good. I think I got what I need. I don't know that I would necessarily invest the time or other episodes on the Action or Justice League or Legion of Superheroes. But I am glad that I at least read this. This was one of the few remaining gaps in my modern Superman reading history. At this point, there's very little left when we're talking about really big gaps. It's essentially the New Krypton saga right before the New 52, and then the New 52 era of Superman. And I'm going to be covering both of those later on the podcast this year. So, from basically Crisis forward, not that I've read every single issue, but just about. So I'm glad to have covered this. One other thing that I guess I was wondering about, and I think that some fans had vocalized this as well, about with Bendis coming on board, whether all of the characters would begin talking in Bendis speak. I know you know what I mean.
There were some moments. Well, there weren't as many moments of characters talking over one another and speaking at the same time. I feel like there wasn't as much of that, but what you did get is you got the Superman Clark Kent inner monologue. I think that's what you got as far as a Bendis tactic.
I agree, and like I said, I like that. I was totally on board with that. There was one of the moments with the flashback to the Intergalactic Council. One of the floating heads said that he referenced his nephew's bar mitzvah. There were things like that. There were some exchanges between aliens that just did not ring true at all. And we can suspend our disbelief and say, oh, well, they have the same customs we do, but it was just a lot of the rhythm and the phrasings were so colloquial and just so earthly that they felt like in moments like that really took me out of it, where it's like, I know we're dealing with a comic and aliens, but it's like, this does not sound right to me. But as far as Superman himself, and again, the rest of the core characters, it's not like they weren't all sounding like Ultimate Peter Parker or whatever. So I appreciated that.
There was one moment where, in the past of Krypton, where Jor-El was pleading his case to the Circle, who he had access to, like, please, I cannot convince anyone about that something's going on with the planet. Please speak up on my behalf. Where they were basically saying, is he talking about this again? And one of the members, I think maybe the Tamarani leader, said, can I hang up now? It's like, that's not I thought it was funny, but as time passes, they're holograms. They can't hang up a hologram. Can I disconnect now? I probably would have utilized that terminology, but
yeah, I mean, because I think there's a line. I think showing that these alien beings have a lot of the same thoughts or tensions or frustrations as we do, I think that's fine. I think it was just the way in which it was articulated. In the end, maybe don't send this episode to Bendis.
Well, trust me, he is accustomed to, he's accustomed to various types of, shall we say, feedback from the public.
And look, I've only had a little taste of this, but with the My Comic Shop Country documentary out there, people have talked about it and written about it, and a lot of it was very lovely, but there were people who expressed things that they didn't like. So I can appreciate that, and you know, what do I want to say? You know, I've not had the interactions with him, with Bendis, that you have, but we did exchange a few Instagram messages around the time that the documentary came out. And he seems like a really nice guy. And that's the sense that I've gotten from interviews. And one thing that I want to say on a very positive note, I definitely got the sense that this was someone who came on to writing Superman with affection. And I know he did a lot of research. I remember seeing the photos he posted with like all the research material and the old comics that DC gave him to look at.
He was at the house in Cleveland, the Superman Museum. He was there. I think that he was immersed in the stuff, and I think that some of it bled through in what we read.
Yeah, and there were nice touches. There were a few touches in this work that they read like someone who had thought a lot about Superman and said, "Ooh, like that would be cool." Like right at the opening of Man of Steel, where it's Firefly and who's the other fire-based?
If you hadn't asked me, I could...
All right. Anyway, we have the bad guys are having their conversation, and one of them is like, shh, like don't yell. Like he listens for certain things. He listens for threats. So just this idea that the criminal element in Metropolis would know things to sort of avoid because it might attract the attention of the super hearing, I thought was really cool. And then to tie this entire thing together full circle, in that first issue, Superman is listening to the city and he hears this beautiful music. And in the final issue of the story, he tracks down the young lady who's playing the music and has a really nice moment and thanks her for sort of being a little bit of that homing beacon for him when he's far from home. So, did you find who it was?
I'm looking. Firefly and Killer Moth.
Killer Moth, that was the other one. Damn it. Thank you. So, so stuff like that was good. And at the end of the day, if I had to choose between stories with plots that I enjoyed more versus, stories that I feel captured the core and the character of Superman, I go for the latter. And that's what I feel like Bendis did. And so I really do. I really like that aspect of it. There were just a lot of storytelling choices that I didn't like, either in and of themselves, just the idea of them, even if they were executed well, like Truth, or things like Rogol Zaar that I don't like the idea of it, but I also don't think that it connected the way it was meant to. So that's where I land on all of this.
So here's the test. Here's the question. After every graphic novel book club that we do, I'll pose this question to the room. I will say, would you recommend this story to someone? Now, maybe not it could be an experienced Superman reader, or it could just be someone that's like, I saw some movies. Is there something good I can read for Superman? Would this be in the mix somewhere as far as available and in print material?
I mean, I'm sad to say, but no.
Interesting.
Now, at the same time, would I don't work at a comic shop anymore, but if I did, or if I were just visiting a shop and I saw someone, kind of like grabbing it off the shelf and looking through it and deciding whether or not to get it, would I say, put that back? No, I would. Like, that's the thing. I wouldn't talk someone out of it for whatever that's worth, and especially if someone said like, I love Bendis. It's like, yeah, you should see what he did on Superman. But I don't know if it's that hypothetical person who's like, oh, I'm thinking about getting into Superman. This would be pretty low down on the list of stories that I'd be like, you got to read this.
So what would be high on the list? Like, I feel like you and I would agree that Kingdom Come is somewhere on that list of things.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's like a radical, I don't think anyone's gonna be like, oh my God, what a crazy suggestion. And look, just going back to the Lord retail of it all, it's like, you got a sense of what the person likes and what their sensibilities are and how they've experienced the character in TV and film that might inform what I recommend, right? So all of that, we would take that into account. But For All Seasons is definitely a favorite of mine. Birthright is right up there at the top. Kingdom Come. All-Star Superman, I'm still reconciling exactly how I feel about that, but that's definitely a classic, and that's definitely one that you could gift to someone. Especially if you think they might gravitate towards more of the Silver Age take on the character. But that's definitely one. If DC had that early Triangle material in print, That would be something. It is available, most of it on the app, which was how I read it when I did that, those episodes last year. So, a lot of that I would recommend. I think it held up really well for me.
So I think part of the problem with the triangle stuff and part of a strength of this, in my opinion, is that you've got a beginning and you got a conclusion with this stuff. Whereas the triangle, you could do from here to there, but there wasn't really like a storyline with a true conclusion in any of that stuff. Like there were story arcs like, Millennium Giants, but there just weren't many, it was very open-ended. Whereas with this, you're reading what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're reading 5 books and you can be done with it, or you can read other Superman stuff. I think for me, when this was coming out and, just things going on in the world, things going on in my world, I wanted to read something about someone with good intentions, someone that had the power to do good, the power to think about others at their own expense consistently and constantly. Someone trying to think of solutions that are not strictly violent or aggressive. I think that through line that's all throughout this content, I think that was something that I was looking for. And I think that's something that I would hope that people from time to time would be looking for. Did you see the Batman movie? Did you see that?
I have not seen the Batman movie yet. By the time people hear this, I will have.
What I'm going to say is no spoiler at all. It is not a spoiler. And you know me, I don't like spoiling. It's not. When I find myself saying, I hate crime too, which is not the same as, maybe I can, after reading the Superman stuff, maybe I can find some way to help somebody. Maybe I can, be a little bit better of a person. And I think that's kind of what I got out of the Superman content. And I think that's an inherent part of Superman. Maybe not from Action Comics #1, where he is, really letting people have it. They're doing the wrong thing. But at some point that does become part of the character. I don't know where that happens. It's not the Silver Age where he's trying to get out of doing stuff, which is primarily what those stories seem to be. Superman trying to get out of doing stuff and making Lois or Jimmy appear to be completely insane when they figured something out. So I don't know. But at some point, putting a priority on doing the right thing and trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be, that became part of Superman's content. And I'm not saying other characters don't have that on the shelf, but Superman has that. And I think that's important. And I wanted to get that at that time, at that period of time. And I got it.
That's lovely. And I'm glad that it had that effect for you. And I would never want to take away from that. So that's awesome. And I hope other people did too. And yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else that you had that you wanted to say? Because I feel like we've sort of covered it.
Yeah, I think that it really felt to me like, between Superman, Man of Steel, and Action Comics, Bendis wrote a lot of Superman. He did. But I just felt like this would be another multi-year run that would cover a lot of ground, a lot of concepts, and a lot of stuff. So it felt shorter than I would have thought it would have been.
His jump from Marvel to DC to Superman in particular felt a lot like, and from a marketing perspective, DC really leaned into the similarities to Byrne's similar move in the 80s with the whole Bendis is coming sort of thing. And they both started off with a Man of Steel miniseries, and they both wrote Superman and Action Comics. Byrne would also go on to co-write Adventures of Superman for a relatively short period of time, but both did Action and Superman, and both runs ended kind of around the same point, like in the after 20 or so issues.
In my mind, it seems like Byrne was there like for years and years in my mind.
That's the thing. He wasn't. I mean, I guess it felt like that because it was multiple titles. So it, he did rack up the number of issues. And Byrne also did those World of Krypton, World of Smallville, World of Metropolis miniseries. So that, added to it as well. But, that's another instance where, at least again, in terms of the output, it echoed Byrne. And in both instances, I think everyone probably, assumed this would be a longer run. I mean, I'm not asking you if you have any insider information, but I mean, like, do you have any sense of why the run ended up seeming so truncated?
Nothing. I have no idea. But I do know that a lot of the subjects did reappear in Justice League. Like we talked about, there were a few things that maybe were completed in the pages of Justice League, or I'll say the subjects seemed to be completed. They ran their course not here, but in Justice League. They reached their natural conclusion. Some of the subjects. Gotcha.
Well, like I said, I am content with the Bendis era of Superman, with what I've consumed of it, and I think I'm good there.
You're a tough room. You're a tough room, though.
Am I, though? I'm curious to hear a reaction to this, and see where people land. I mean, look, I stand by what I said, and I genuinely did feel like I went in with an open mic. I really didn't go in wanting to bag on this or anything like that, but and especially when we're talking about Krypton and the origin, I do feel strongly. But
I think that you have a very clear and specific version of what is Superman. We all do in our own way, but you definitely do. You definitely do have that.
It's true. And I'm sure this is informed too by the fact that I am, currently in the midst with this podcast of reading and watching and rereading and rewatching a lot. And, so it's kind of all swirling around, and you're seeing what works and what doesn't. And, when something really hits, it's really meaningful and I get a lot out of it, and other things, unfortunately, sometimes fall kind of flat. And that was the category for this. But, again, and not to belabor the point, but it's like, yes, I feel a certain way about the origin. I feel a certain way about the secret identity, but I am open to a story that I think is really compelling. So it's not, I don't want to present myself as being like, no, I'm so like, it has to be this one way. That's really not it. But in any event, I thank you very much you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you rereading these books and spending this time talking with me. I know people heard the ad for Acme Comics, but is there anything else you want to say about Acme while we have you here?
We've been around for a long time. We've been around since 1983. And I've been caretaker of this place, and has carried myself as such for 25 years, basically. And now I'm serving in a whole new capacity that I appreciate everyone who has helped to get me here, including many people that have never set foot in the store before, that have done mail orders with us. They bought stuff off of our eBay store, search Acme Comics. And, every little bit contributed and continues to contribute to the big picture of what we're doing here. And what we try to do is represent the best of this material and serve as guides and navigators in what can be very noisy and colorful and sometimes overwhelming world of entertainment. And I'm just lucky to do this. Lucky to have been part of your documentary. I appreciate you making me part of this. When people think of me, they probably don't think of Superman, but it's a character that I know pretty well. There's plenty of characters I don't know very well at all, but Superman, I know a little bit. Know a little bit about Superman. So this has been a good conversation that I normally don't get to talk about this type of thing. Not Superman.
On the note of Acme, I hope everyone checks out acmecomics.com and of course, follow all the other calls to action that we give you in the commercial that you already heard. And I really enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I guess the final reason, that I wanted to have you for this is I felt like out of everyone I know, you would probably make the best case for the Bendis era of Superman. I don't, within my circles, and I know a lot of Superman fans, and I'm not speaking for all of them. I'm not saying, oh, they all hate this run, but I don't know. No one else immediately came to mind. And there were even a couple, of other folks like this has come up in conversation. I'm like, yeah, I think I would do an episode. And they're like, eh. So it's like, I feel like you were the one who would make the best case for it. Now, just to sort of close the loop here, and this whole idea of, you being cryptic and all that. Like when I talk to my wife later, again, she's out of town at the moment. When I talk to her, I'm sure she's going to say like, oh, did Jermaine like the comics? What do I think I would say to her? Yes, he did. He enjoyed them. I mean, is that fair to say?
I really did, especially having been away from Superman for a while. This reminded me that I do like Superman. I like the Phantom Zone. I like the things that come along with Superman. That I'd stepped away from it all for a good period of time. I was still in the same room with it, but just as a fan, I kind of stepped away from it for a while. And this reminded me of, I like Superman 2. That was a cool movie. Superman animated series. I really like that a lot. It just helped me through this material, helped me to realize that I do like Superman.
Well, then it served its purpose. So thank you, Jermaine, very much. Thank you to the audience. As always, make sure you check out acmecomics.com. Make sure you come back here in 1 week. Next week, we are moving into current Superman comics for an episode, and we are going to talk about the current Warworld saga in Action Comics written by Philip Kennedy Johnson. I have not yet read any of this. I've heard great things. I'm excited to dive into it. I'm excited to sort of dip my toe back into the water of current ongoing monthly Superman comics. So I'm really excited for that. I hope you'll come back. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. The spin-off podcast, Digging for Justice, a DC fan journey, is available now exclusively at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, starting at the $1 level. New episodes release monthly, and many more rewards are available too, including a robust back catalog of bonus podcasts. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show.